Stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the American songwriter, guitarist, singer, multi-instrumentalist and record producer. It's Jonny Polonsky, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry, and has recently brought out several albums, the latest being Rise of the Rebel Angels, which you can find on his website and Bandcamp page. But his first album was titled Hi, My Name is Jonny, which was released on American recordings. Anyway, this is the interview, so after several minutes of interesting but slightly casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject of the early formative years after I'd mentioned my love of the early 70s. Anyway, this is Jonny's response. Jonny, it's over to you.
But I love, that's kind of my favorite period of rock, all those bands you just mentioned. I love the early 70s glitter rock. But for me, it was the Beatles at age 5. My parents had a bunch of records, a pretty big record collection. I remember Wendy, Walter Carlos, Switched on Bach, and there was a bunch of things in there. But the thing that I really gravitated towards was, do you remember the Beatles red and blue primary colored, those greatest hits that were really popular in the 70s?
Oh God, yes, we all had them. That was our kind of go-to reference points, and you sort of learned one bit was the early period, one was the latter period.
So I fell madly in love with the early period, with the red, and I just listened to it all the time. And then soon after the Monkees, I bought a greatest hits from a friend of mine for like $4, I think.
Right. Yes.
That was what really got me started, was the Beatles and the Monkees. And then a couple years after that, we got cable TV. So I'm a first generation MTV lad, so I just watched MTV constantly.
Yes.
I mean, all TV really. I used to read a lot, but I watched so much TV. I don't even watch it anymore. I don't need to. I watched so much when I was a kid. But like a lot of tons of MTV and theme shows. I didn't realize so much later in my life, but I was really affected by, there's some great commercial jingles and some really great theme show music, like Sanford and Son and All in the Family, like all these great melodies.
Yes, and were your parents at all into music, art, culture, bohemian?
Yeah, very much so. My mom was a singer, and she I think in the early 60s she sang in folk clubs and played guitar. They both grew up in Chicago, where I'm from.
Right.
And she also studied piano. She'd tell me that she used to practice like 5 hours a day. So I guess she was serious at one point in her life, like really going for it. And we had a baby grand growing up, which was great. So I learned how to play. I just kind of picked it up.
Yes.
My dad didn't play anything, but he loved music, loved jazz, especially. Turned me on to Oscar Peterson and Count Basie, but he loved, I was obsessed with Jimi Hendrix once I started playing guitar.
Yes.
Jimi Hendrix too. But yeah, both my parents, I have an older brother. He's always been into music too. He plays bass and guitar and accordion. So growing up, we were both very supported by our parents. They didn't really play. My mom still played a little bit. She would sit down and play piano and sing to us, but for the most part, it was my brother and I.
Yes, my God, having an older brother or sister is always a critical bit in my life, because my brother was 7 years older than me, so he was very into that 70s world of prog rock. So I used to sneak into his room to find these records that he had forbidden me to go and play. So I'd obviously go and crawl in and sort of see them, and learn how to be very careful not to put your fingers on the records or put them back in exactly how he left them, because he was very uptight about the whole thing. So yes, people like Genesis, Wishbone Ash, Barclay James Harvest, all those bands I used to find fascinating. And then also the solo work of Rick Wakeman as well, which was quite interesting. So I loved all that kind of stuff. But he also had the sort of a Deep Purple album, Black Sabbath. And then he had, for some strange reason, which I don't know if it's strange, but he had the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John, which was like, and this was like 73, 74 time. So those records hadn't got any kind of critical awareness. They were just
they were just records.
They were just records. And bizarrely, the Beatles had only just broken up, but it felt like a completely different time. There was like such a idea that you think, well, they'd only broken up 3 or 4 years ago, but they were well and truly the
It's
last
kind of
chapter.
surreal, isn't it? I think about that sometimes. Like I remember when John Lennon died. Like we were alive when all four Beatles walked the earth, and Jimi Hendrix only died a couple of years before I was born. These and Bob Dylan is still rocking. You know what I mean? Like these people they're human beings, but at the same time, it's like they're almost like it's like Abraham Lincoln or Paul Bunyan or some kind of folk hero.
Yes.
It's
Well, I
larger than
think absolutely, and I think we sort of try not to take things for granted as you get older, even though it's difficult when you're younger. But to sort of have been on the planet at the same time as all those musicians and people
yeah.
like David Bowie, to have coincided our time with people like that is just like, wow, that's just brilliant. And
Did you
yes,
see
you're
Bowie
right.
live?
Yeah, I saw him a few times. I saw him on the Serious Moonlight tour. I saw him at Live Aid, which was very
Oh
okay.
wow,
So that was quite interesting. And then the Glass Spider tour, which was all right. That was in Berlin. And then I saw him on the Reality tour as well. So, um,
cool.
oh, yeah, and Glastonbury. I went to Glastonbury in 2000, and he was playing on the Sunday night. And
Oh, very
that
cool.
was, so I saw him quite a lot because he did have a massive impact and meaning. I don't know if you ever had an artist you just feel like, even though some of his
Oh,
work I didn't,
tons. Yeah.
yeah.
Hugely. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I saw Tin Machine. I was at the Bowie's 50th birthday party at Madison Square Garden. That was incredible. Just like hearing that voice come out of the speakers for the first time. I mean, Tin Machine I loved, but I was a teenager and I liked Bowie, but I wasn't like super into it yet. But I loved Tin Machine. But then by the time the 50th birthday happened in the mid 90s, I was fully hugely into Bowie. So really paying attention and hearing that voice was like, oh my God, like it's just like a supernatural event.
Yes, I could imagine. So when you got to that ripe age of 17, this was 1989, 1990. Had you already started going to gigs at that stage in the 80s?
Oh yeah. My first show was Lionel Richie with Tina Turner opening up in 1983 when I was 10.
Wow, that's
In retrospect, my parents were very lenient in letting me go to shows. I went to shows all the time. Plus, I didn't grow up in Chicago proper. The first 3 years of my life, we were in the city, but then we moved to a town called Wilmette, which is 2 cities north of Chicago along the lake. So it goes Chicago, Evanston, and Wilmette. So one of the great things about Wilmette, other than being very beautiful and right on the lake, with old brick-lined streets and stuff like that. One of the great things was it's the last stop on the L, which what you call the tube. It's
oh
the L
yes.
in Chicago because it's elevated because it's above ground, not underground. So the last stop is Wilmette, so I could get out. I could go into the city for I think like 60 cents, or it was really cheap back then. And I would do that all the time. Like first without my parents' approval, without them noticing, without them knowing. But then after a while, I would go with my friends, and there's a great club that's still there called the Metro, Cabaret
Right.
Metro, and right by the ballpark. And I've seen so like many, many dozens of shows and played there, and just a legendary place. But yeah, I used to go to shows all the time. That was an incredible city to be in for that. And the Metro, the Aragon, another place that's still there. I mean, that's at least more than 100 years old. My grandma used to dance to Duke Ellington there. It's one of those old, beautiful ballrooms. The Riviera nightclub, used to go to that all the time. I'd sneak in there too. Like I used to I wore black anyway, but I would like wear black and like go around 4 p.m. when I knew the sound checks were. And I would just walk in like I belonged there. And even though I was 15, nobody questioned me. And I would go, meet the Beastie Boys or try to find Ted Nugent or something, and just hand people these homemade tapes I would make. I was
Wow.
obsessed. Yeah,
That was
I
that
always loved
was
going to shows.
yes. So when you got to sort of that ripe age of 16, 17, did you stay on for college at that point or did you leave?
Well, I graduated high school at 17, or was I 18? I think 17. And I went to school. I went to college after that. Just one semester of Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois. And that was really just because you're supposed to go to college. So I went to college. I had zero interest. Plus, I was sick most of the time anyway. I got mononucleosis. So I was just in bed half the time anyway. And that's right when Nevermind came out, the fall
Yes.
of 91. And that was, for me, it was just the absolute bullseye. Like I loved punk and I loved the Beatles and I loved so many of the elements that went into Nirvana. And but at the same time, to me, they were just so unbelievably fresh and exciting, and just the most exciting, satisfying, just beautiful thing that I've like ever experienced. And
Yes.
I was the right age too. So like all I cared about was Nirvana and the Replacements and the Who, and just making music and writing. And um, then I quit and joined a band. And after that, I went to Berklee College of Music for a couple semesters in Boston. And that again, like I really didn't have any actual interest in going. I just wanted to hang out with Reeves Gabrels, he's now the guitar player in The Cure, but back then he had just left Tin Machine. And I was obsessed with Tin Machine, and he was like a hero and a mentor. I used to call him on the phone, like back when everyone had phone lines, or home phones. You
Yes.
could dial 411 and get directory assistance. You tell them what city you wanted and what the person's name was, and if they had a listed phone number, you could get their phone number and call them up. And back then people would answer their phones, so I did that all the time and became friends with Reeves. And he was an incredible supporter. Like I would ask him questions all the time, about guitar playing and about Bowie and the Sales Brothers and how they did this, how they did that. And I would send him my homemade tapes, and he loved them and was like a great, great early supporter. And he was the one that got my stuff to Frank Black, to Charles Thompson. So I was a
Yes.
Pixies fan. I still am, but you know how it is when you're 18, 19. That's just like everything. Um, that's really, Reeves and Charles, Black Francis, they really got me my start.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of interesting because it was around 89. Well, for me, sort of indie pop changed quite a lot during the 80s because my main band were the Smiths. So from 83 to
Hmm.
87, it was just solidly about the Smiths. But also there was
Yeah,
the John Peel show that used to play all this, he used to play all this really
amazing.
fantastic
Yeah,
music, including, all the sort of world music from people like the Bundu Boys to the Four Brothers and reggae like, Gregory Isaacs and Dennis Brown's, and then sort of
hmm,
just fantastic rock from Sonic Youth to the Butthole Surfers and Big Black and people. So it was a great education. And, we also had 3 weekly music papers, which was fantastic because you had the
yep,
NME, Melody Maker and Sound. So,
hmm,
and, as you know, the UK is very tiny, isn't it? So, a band who just gets going, quickly can get their transit van and off they go around the countryside
yep,
and do a tour of 10 or 20 dates. And so there's a kind of momentum that can happen. But I do remember when the Smiths broke up and then Ecstasy came along. So there was the dance scene with Primal Scream, the Soup Dragons, the Stone Roses, Happy
yep.
Mondays. And then there was that scene. Then was it the house scene as well? Was it Chicago House as well, which came out, which was quite.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was happening, but I wasn't paying attention to that at the time. It wasn't really my thing. But yeah, I mean, Chicago was an incredible city. House music, industrial. That's where Ministry started. Wax Trax Records.
That's
I love that stuff now, but at the time, I wasn't paying any attention to it.
were the Revolting Cocks from
Oh yeah,
Chicago.
well, yeah. That's like a Ministry subset. It's basically many of the same members, just with a different name, doing different songs.
Right.
Chris
Yes.
Conley, yeah.
Chris Conley. God, I've done a couple of interviews with Chris. He's such a
Oh
nice
yeah.
guy. He is so.
He's a lovely guy and brilliant artist. He's so great. And he's always doing
Yes.
something new and something, pushing himself. And I love what he does.
He loves the work of Lou Reed, doesn't he? He was in a very obscure Scottish band who I'm not going to remember. Did Testimony or something like that, which
Oh,
it has these amazing bells. If you have a look at his discography, he was in a very obscure Scottish band, but
okay.
but they were very good actually. So then, as the 90s progressed, and we suddenly had the world of grunge, which was, I must admit, I loved Bleach. I thought because I went to see
Yeah.
Nirvana when they were supporting Tad on a double
Oh, wow.
bill, and I managed to
Oh,
even
that show. Okay. Yeah.
that
Famous.
that was the one. That was fantastic. And then
Yeah.
Nevermind came out and it was all going well, and then it all goes so badly. So what was the early 90s like for you? You'd obviously were doing your 4-track demos and sort of putting these
Yeah.
around. So how does that then progress into your next step in life?
Well, in 91 is when I graduated high school, and that's when I was bugging people on the phone, like Reeves and Frank Black and Mark Rebo. He was another early supporter. He's an incredible guitar player. Played with Tom Waits and 1,000 different people. John Zorn, Elvis Costello, Xander Schloss, who was another real early mentor. He's an incredible guitar player. People know him as the bass player from the Circle Jerks, but I love his guitar playing. Anyway, just I would just, and what to me it wasn't networking. It was just these are people whose music I really love and revere. I think it's only natural when you're really serious about getting into any, not just music, anything. Like you want to look for people who've been doing it longer and learn from them. And
Yes.
it wasn't like a conscious thing. It was I just sort of still at that age where I was basically a kid, where it's just this is just what I was doing. I felt like doing it, so I did it. But that's I would make these tapes. I used to record on my 4-track cassette machine and make a cover, go down to the Kinkos and do a little, dupe a bunch of tapes and hand them out to people, use it as an excuse to, sneak backstage. And, I mean, I didn't want to just like meet my heroes and get an autograph or something. I wanted to like give them a tape and get their approval and the stuff that I was doing early on was really funny, like very much in the vein of Ween, even though I
Yes.
hadn't heard them yet, but it was still kind of stylistically very diverse. And I wasn't at the time, I wasn't sure if they were any good, but I knew that they were funny. And, I knew that, being young and precocious, it was a good combination to just to get people's attention. So I would give them the tapes and for the most part, pretty much everybody loved them, which was great, very encouraging at that age. Um, and that's all I was doing really. It was just by let's see, I guess by 93 or so, I'd, it took a while to start getting calls from Frank Black. But eventually he would call my house and, I'd hear the phone ring and then like a half an hour later, my mom would be like, Johnny, it's Charles on the phone. Like she'd been talking to him for like half an hour, just like chit-chatting with Black Francis. Um,
Yes.
and and then the following year, 94, he flew me out here to Los Angeles when I was still living in Chicago, but he was living in LA. I flew out to LA and recorded a demo that he produced. And he had by that point hooked me up with his manager, who was the original Pixies manager, Ken Goes. Ken was my first manager.
Mm.
Charles produced the demo, and that got me signed to American. Rick Rubin just signed me off of a demo tape, which in those days was pretty unusual. Usually you had to go through all these hoops of playing live, and I didn't have a band at the time. I was playing everything on my own. Um, so that was really it. 95, I signed the record deal with American Recordings and had begun recording that first record. And I put together a live band with a couple of guys from high school who I'd stayed in touch with, one of whom is my oldest friend. It was a great band, just the three of us. And we ended up going on the road so the record got released in early 96. We went on tour opening for Frank Black, 12 weeks with no break, which at the time I was like, all right, I guess that's what a tour is.
Yes.
It's a quarter of the year, massive. So we went on the road for 3 solid months and got really good. And, we're really young. So we're just like smoking too much weed and drinking too much. And everybody's hating each other by the end of it. I did
Classic.
Lollapalooza when it was a touring festival. We did that in the summer. When I remember we played London. I forget where we played. We did like a little place. And we also opened up for Frank Black at, I can't remember the name. It was maybe a 3,000 seater. But so played over in the UK and Europe a little bit.
And how
Some
did it go
festivals.
down touring Europe? Did you enjoy that?
I loved it. We didn't really spend much time in the UK or in Europe. Just maybe less than half a dozen shows. Um, yeah, things went a bit. It was difficult for me at the time. It didn't. It was very confusing. It was really incredible, like getting signed to that label and having so much support and excitement and getting on MTV and in Rolling Stone, all these different papers and New York Times, blah blah blah. It was really thrilling, but it was also
Yes.
very. I was real young, so it was difficult to really feel like I deserved it, and all my peers and my brother, like everybody I knew was in a band and trying to do that same thing. So I felt a lot of like pressure and guilt and just kind of unraveled, to be honest.
Oh,
But
oh God. Yes,
yeah,
this does happen because it's kind of a weird moment, isn't it? Music has changed quite a lot. You had the post-grunge period, which was in America, get into quite some heavy bands. And then in the UK, we had Britpop, which was quite interested and had that great sort of nod towards people like the Kinks and stuff like that. So you
sure.
had Blur, Oasis, and Elastica. So how did you, navigate the your post debut album? Because then, sort of, as we sort of start to roll up to Woodstock '99, the music landscape has changed a lot by then, hasn't it?
It was so gross. It was so bad. Like after Kurt died, like it just went rapidly downhill. I mean, I love System of a Down, but all the other bands in that genre, like just I thought were so unappealing. But
Yes.
for me personally, I was just kind of drifting and just drinking a lot and in the wrong relationship. And, I was still pretty young, but, I was just, I just made a couple of colossal decisions that took a while to recover from. So I started playing in other people's bands. Like I was playing in Local H. This I don't know if you remember them. They had a hit in the '90s. And I played keyboards in April March. She is an American but would sing in French and do kind of '60s yeah music. We toured France and Europe a lot. So for me, like I was just drifting and just I would still be writing and performing. It took me a while to make another record. And by 2001, I put out an EP on a little indie label in California. And I was starting to bounce back and ended up moving to LA here in 2002. And the second record came out 8 years after the first record, The Power of Sound. That was 2004.
Yes, that's quite an amazing gap. Were people worried about you at this stage?
They should have been. I don't know. I don't know if they were, but yeah, I'm just glad I'm still here and made it through. And I stopped drinking a few years ago, and and I'm also a dad, so like there's a few years, not that particular gap, but like another after that second record, there was another 8 year gap. I was a stay-at-home dad for a while, and then got divorced and got sober. So like a lot of like real major changes that just took a while to, just life. And I never stopped writing or recording, and I've been releasing records on my own pretty consistently since 2012.
Yes. And what was that kind of after your experience of being with Rick Rubin on a major label? How did you? Because a lot of people do struggle a little bit, sort of the post fame game. Sort of it can be quite tricky. I know, sort of speaking to a lot of musicians, that moment where you're wondering, you can't believe it's happened, but you can't digest that moment that it's the kind of moment is here, but then it's gone, and you think, my God, come back! I need to do that all again. But it's like you can only do it kind of once. So I just wondered how you navigated that kind of having to sort of think of yourself more of an artist than a sort of a commercial product.
Yeah, I mean that took a long time, to be honest. Like just lots of therapy and and not purely because of career stuff, but just life. Just stopping drinking and just getting my shit together. But yeah, the last decade and a half, I just realized like this is just who I am. This is what I do. Like I don't need to justify it to myself or anybody. It's what I've loved to do since I was a kid. And in any, as far as the business side of things, like in any aspect of life, there's ups and downs, and there's times when plateaus and things aren't like you have to like decide for yourself what success is. And to me,
experience the music of Bob Dylan like never before in the Tony Award-winning musical Girl from the North Country.
Here comes the story of the hurricane.
This critically acclaimed Broadway show features dozens of classic Dylan hits, including Like a Rolling Stone, I Want You, and Forever Young. Don't miss Girl from the North Country live on stage.
At the Hollywood Pantages Theater, May 14th through June 2nd. Visit BroadwayInHollywood.com.
Success is just feeling good about who I am and where I'm at as a person and in my life, and making music that I love, and regardless of it, if it's as well received as the first record or whatever, any kind of external thing, that's really out of my control. But the last, I feel like I'm more on fire than I've really ever been, to be honest. Like now, the last few years.
Yes. How did you navigate the dreaded COVID period? Was that something that sort of initially helped and then hindered, or did it hinder then help? How did you sort of cope with that kind of weird period?
I was living in New York at the time. I'd just moved into a big apartment in Brooklyn, which was a nice place to hunker down. It was big and bright and spacious. So for me, I was really fortunate. I had some money in the bank. I was in a nice home, and I just got to work. I started recording and I'd already released a record earlier in the year. I'd been in Europe touring around, mostly Belgium and the Netherlands a little bit, just before COVID. I almost got caught in Belgium for COVID.
Right.
Yeah, but I got home and started making another record and made a bunch of videos and put it out later in the year. So for me, I just stayed active, and the hardest part was I didn't get to see my kids for 18 months. That was brutal.
God, that is bad. Yes.
Yeah. But
And when you just further back down the line, you've been in various bands, weren't you? You sort of had a go at sort of being in different sort of lineups. Which was there one called Big Noise? Was that
Big Nose?
Big Nose. Could have been Big Nose. Big Noise. Yes. What was
a big noise?
What was that kind of experience like? Did that
was great. That was, I was playing guitar, and it's Tim Comerford on bass and Brad Wilk on drums. They're the rhythm section from Rage Against the Machine and Audio Slave. I met them through Audio Slave because my first day job when I moved to Los Angeles was working for Audio Slave, just as their day-to-day in-town kind of all, not just guitar, but it's like tech for everything. Like I would tune their guitars and set everything up and record their rehearsals. And my friend and now my manager, he was managing them at the time. So that's how I got the gig. But that was incredible. I mean, really the job was like get them lunch and then sit around and watch them play music all day and write songs. So being 10 feet away from Chris Cornell and all those guys, it was, I learned so much. It was really an incredible experience. And when they broke up, I'd stayed friends with all of them. And, Tim and Brad and I had been jamming, and we just formed a band. We never really, we put out a cover of the Surf song. What's it called? Wipeout, for one of those Penguin movies, when Penguin movies were all the rage.
Right. Yes. And
I played in Tom Morello's band. I played bass in his band on and off, and we toured a bunch. And Chris, I'd stayed in touch with Chris Cornell. We would, email and stuff like that. And I was playing in Juliette Lewis's band. I was with Juliette and the Licks, and we opened up for Chris on tour. So yeah, I mean, moving out to LA, I did a bunch of session work, played on a bunch of Rick Rubin records that he was producing. Like I played on the last couple Johnny Cash records. We recorded about 60 songs after Johnny had died. The whole band would go into the studio and overdub at the same time. Ben Montench and Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Matt Sweeney, who's a great guitar player, lives in Manhattan, and Smokey Hormel, great guitar player from Beck, and Tom Waits. So in that same band, we did a couple Neil Diamond records, Dixie Chicks. It was pretty incredible. Like I've been able to play with a lot of people whose music I really love and grew up on.
And when you sort of a few years later, after that had sort of passed, you did an album, Intergalactic Messenger of Divine Light. So where were you kind of emotionally during that period? Had things moved for you quite a lot at that point?
Yeah, I mean that was post-divorce. That was Intergalactic Messenger of Divine Light and Love, the longest title. To me, I was just trying to find something. Things just sort of come to me, like it's just like, oh, that sounds good, that feels good. I wanted something that was like outrageous and bold and striking, like Electric Warrior, or T-Rex, or like Love Sexy, Prince, something like that. And the cover
Yes.
to go along with it. I recorded that record in Rick Rubin's studio in the basement of his house where we did all the Johnny Cash stuff. He very graciously allowed me to, hole up there for a few months and record for free. Um, and yeah, I mean, that record was really just me just trying to get back into the swing of things and get back into really making music and making records.
What was your what's your songwriting sort of technique? Do you sort of have to go somewhere to get into the space, or can you do it are you methodical? Do you sort of wake up every morning and think, right, I'm going to spend the first 2 hours writing or playing? I mean, or do you have to go into the desert and have a sort of moment on your own with solitude? What is the process for sort of bringing a song together?
Be any sort of way, really. I'm not good at schedules. I've tried doing that. Sometimes I've had luck, just forcing it, like saying, okay, I'm going to write a song and I don't care if it's good or bad. I'm just going to, finish one, and just kind of put those kind of parameters can be helpful. But generally, it just sort of comes when it comes. Like I'll pick up an acoustic guitar usually and just be kind of messing around with chords and, humming a melody or singing something. And it just sort of forms on its own. And, words generally come later, maybe a phrase or maybe a title or maybe a full chorus might come. But it's usually just like vowel sounds, just kind of vocalizing, almost like scat singing, just to sort of get the shape of the meter and the sounds that it's making. But really, the most important thing is the the melody and this just the kind of the feel of the whole thing. But I've written entire songs in my head. Like I wrote a song called "People Are Lonely, Horny, Angry, and Depressed." That was entirely written in my head on a plane flight, just looking around, and that phrase just hit me, struck me, and I just turned it into a song. It just that I could hear all the chords in my head. I just wrote it down, made sure I remembered it. Um,
Yes.
I've written songs, in the bath, like driving in a car, like. But typically it's just hanging out at home, just messing around on guitar. Like more and more in the last decade or so, like because I'm recording pretty much everything at home on my laptop, Pro Tools. It's all the same gear as you get in a studio, just on a smaller scale. So I'll just make a track, like whether it's with a synth or a drum track or something, and I can sort of make the record and write at the same time. I've done that a little bit. Um, Sometimes you just get a drum groove and start messing around on electric guitar, and different instruments and different sounds bring out different uh, moods and approaches. I've written songs, just playing simple chords on a synthesizer, and it's different than doing it on a piano because like the synth sound will evoke some kind of feeling in me that will lead to a place that I know I wouldn't have gotten to if it was the same chords playing on an acoustic guitar or on an acoustic piano. So a lot of
Yes.
times sounds.
So did you ever sort of? I'm always curious because I seem to meet a lot of musicians who live around the Joshua Tree and Death Valley and places like that. Did you ever
Mhm.
sort of have any? Do you ever sort of go for gong baths or sort of go for any sort of spiritual quest, walking kind of meditations in those sort of landscapes?
I've done that stuff not out in the desert, but being in LA especially, there's that whole culture. Um, there's a place in the desert called what is that place called? The Orgasmatron or something like that. I
Oh
forget.
yes, this is in the Joshua Tree, isn't it?
Yeah,
Where you can
what's
have.
that? What I forget what it's called, but it's a huge pyramid building, and they have big sound baths. I think it'd be
Yes.
fun. I haven't tried that though,
No,
but
that
yeah,
but they're often big on sort of spaceships and being aliens. They love sort of mentioning, because I did go there a few years ago and they were just
okay,
casually talking about, oh yeah, we were with the aliens getting in their spaceship and
okay.
doing things
I
as
think
if.
I thought that was more Roswell, New Mexico, but I'm sure there's there's the The spaceship lovers everywhere.
There are spaceship lovers everywhere. Because you've always, with your latest work, what labels are you on at the moment on the record front? Because some have been self-produced, haven't they, and then sort of released for yourself. Well, who are you sort of with at the moment?
Last year, I put out a record on Loose Groove Records, which is a label owned by Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam, and there's 3 people in the label total. So they put my last record out, Rise of the Rebel Angels, and they're putting out my next one, which comes out in June. That's called Supernatural Radio.
Right.
And first song already came off of that. It's In Deepest Dark. Alan Johannes mixed the record, and he played on a lot of it. I produced it and recorded it, but Alan mixed it, and he plays pretty much all the instruments on that first single. But I'm really excited about it. It took a couple of years to make the record. I thought it was going to be something cheap and quick, but it turned out to be slow and expensive. But it came out great. There's got Steve Jordan, who's playing drums with the Rolling Stones now. He was in the Keith Richards' Expensive Winos. Hunt Sales from Tin Machine, and the drummer from Lust for Life, Iggy. He plays drums on a song. Alan Johannes plays all over the record. Ben Montench from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, he plays B3 and organ on it, or piano in B3. My old friend Scott Tunis, who was Frank Zappa's last bass player, he plays on a couple songs. Jack Irons from he was in Pearl Jam, but he was the original Red Hot Chili Pepper drummer, and he played on Earthquake Weather, Joe Strummer's first solo record that I really love. He played on a bunch of songs, and there's an orchestra on a couple tracks. So I'm really excited about the record. It's very dynamic and very much a concise kind of musical statement.
Yes. And why did you go for Hunt for one or two of the tracks? Was it?
He's incredible. He's one of the greatest drummers of all time. And he sounded incredible. I asked him to. It's kind of a shuffle. It's sort of like a Kinks XTC sort of song. So the song itself is a little bit perky.
Because I did an interview with him a few years ago in his palatial pad somewhere in America, and he talked a lot about his love of jazz drumming and the way you hold your sticks and stuff like that. He obviously comes from not a very different world, but quite a different world to a lot of drummers.
Oh, very much so. Yeah,
and,
plus I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and he's also got a great voice as well. He's got a great vocal on him. Because he released a few singles a couple of years ago, and I thought they were just brilliant. So
I loved his record, Get Your Shit Together, his solo record that he released maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But he's one of my favorite drummers of all time. I love Lust for Life, the Iggy Pop record, the entire record. Him and his brother Tony are incredible. And Tin Machine, those 2 records, I think they're playing is incredible. I actually talked to them about being my band back when I was 20, 21. And it just didn't pan out. But 30 years later, I reached out to Hunt on Instagram. He's very, he's always posting stuff on Instagram, and asked if he would play on a track. And I sent it to him, and he liked it, so he played on it. He knocked it out of the park. He sounds incredible. But I chose him because, the song is very kind of bouncy and like kind of perky sounding, and I wanted some real earthy, his drumming is such a great feel, real mean and solid and beautiful, and such a great swing. Nobody does a shuffle like he does. He, like you said, he's studied all the great jazz drummers and swing drummers and Mitchell, and he's from a whole different era, and I love that era of music, and he still is in great shape and sounds incredible.
Well, yes, and his dad was Soupy Sales, which was quite an amazing showbiz family, actually. So with, I don't know if you saw the David Bowie, was it? The film that came out a few years ago, which had
Teenage Daydream.
Yes,
yeah.
Because that's such a curious and interesting film, because actually the way it's been put together, it kind of stops when Reeves appears, really, isn't it? And it doesn't really but he plays almost the same sort of importance as sort of Mick Ronson, doesn't he? Really, sort of Reeves in so many ways. He gives
Sure.
Bowie that extra sort of ability to navigate out of the kind of 80s and 90s, from the 80s into the 90s with that kind of solo work. So, did you talk to Reeves much about working with Bowie?
Oh yeah, I mean those conversations are so long ago that I can't remember any specifics. But I peppered him with questions all the time. That's all I would do is just call him on the phone and ask him questions. Um, Usually about Tin Machine specifically, and the Sales Brothers, and about guitar playing. We'd talk about. I remember there was one song called "Shopping for Girls" on the
Oh
second
yes, yes.
Tin Machine record, and I mentioned something about like it sounded very Hendrix-like, that kind of hammer-on thing that he's doing. And he I remember him telling me like everyone would say that to him, but he was really aping Marquee Moon by Television, which if you
Oh
listen
yes.
to it's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Um yeah, we talk about Neil Young a lot. And he was just a great mentor. We just talking about how to approach just playing music and being in bands and
So
being
because I was doing this interview with Billy, what was it, Morrison, who's the
yeah.
Billy Idol guitarist, and
Mhm.
he's got a new album that's just come out, which has a fantastic lineup of guest stars and musicians. But he was saying that most of it he can record in his own sort of little studio at home, but it's the drums that has the problem. How did you find recording this album? Because did you manage to record most of it at home, but think, right, we're going to have to get into a very expensive studio to get the drum sound properly sorted?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily like a super expensive studio, but yeah, I mean, I recorded pretty much everything at home. And as far as the Steve Jordan tracks, those tracks are from a session I did with him in the late '90s for a completely different song. So if you solo the drums, you can hear like some bleed from my guitar playing in a completely different key. But it worked for the song that I ended up using it on for this new record. But all the other drums, like pretty much every drummer, nowadays has a setup at home so they can record and do this exact thing. Like someone wants them to play on their record, so they already have it set up. Jack Irons has that. Hunt didn't have that. I booked a studio in Austin where he lives, Austin, Texas, and the engineer got a great drum sound, and it's a few $100. It's not anything out of the too extraordinary.
Yes. And will you
Yeah,
be, have you got live dates lined up later on in the year?
I just played Seattle last weekend. I played a couple shows with in my band. It was Stone Gossard and a drummer named Matt Chamberlain, who's played with everybody, played with Dylan, like all over the place. Everybody. Jeff Fielder, who played with Mark Lanigan and a ton of different people. So I don't have any other live dates scheduled right now, but I'm going to be putting a band together and making some shows. I would love to go on tour. I'm also playing guitar in a band called 7D with Tim Comerford from Rage, Audio Slave. We're a trio. There's a drummer named Matthias Walkrat. And we've been putting singles out on Ben Harper's label, Mad Bunny Records. So we're going to start playing shows. So I'm just keeping busy, just staying creative and making music I love, and just that's it.
Yes, absolutely. And when you're sort of, with art and music, is there any other forms of art that you sort of occasionally dip into to keep inspiration, whether it's film or painting or sculpture? Yeah. Is there anything else that, kind of, gives you some sort of, I don't know, nudge or some sort of kind of forward?
All that. Yeah, I love movies. I love film. I'm not, a scholar, but I'm a huge fan. I watch a lot of movies, and there's great movie theaters here in LA. Quentin Tarantino's got a couple of revival houses. I love to read. I read a lot. I love art. Especially when I was living in New York, the great museums there. I was also an art model. That was my day job for a few years.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. Getting turned into sculptures and paintings and around that world. But I see many parallels between music and visual arts. It's really the exact same conceptually. in my mind. It's just how you achieve it is obviously very different. But music there's an architecture to it. There's temperatures and thickness, thinness, like different qualities of color and texture, stuff like that. But yeah, I love visual arts. It's really inspiring to me. Painting,
Yeah. Did you, I mean,
photography.
because at the beginning you mentioned MTV being sort of an important thing. Was that sort of period in the 80s consuming, all those bands like, I don't know, was it not Haircut 100? Was it, A Flock of Seagulls
Yeah,
and
I love them.
Men Without Hats and
Yeah,
bands like that? Were all those sort of groups and videos, did they all sort of enter your consciousness?
very much so. That's my era. I was 7 when Flock of Seagulls were having hits. I love that music. Just yesterday, I was listening to "Don't Change," the NXS song.
Oh,
Love that
yes.
song, the classic. But yeah, for me, I feel like the '80s they're very maligned in certain ways, which I understand. There's an artificiality, but every decade gets that. Like people used to talk down about the '70s and then it finally like switch around to like all the great things that were in the '70s. There's always good and bad. The thing
Yes.
I loved about the '80s was that it was still obviously there was a lot of money involved. Like by that point, rock and roll became a huge business, but it was also really still creative. And the thing about becoming successful at the time was it was encouraged to be different and to stand out, whether you're Billy Idol or Thomas Dolby or Men Without Hats or you know um, whoever, even like I don't know, the Stranglers or people like a little bit more on the outskirts that weren't necessarily mainstream. Like the idea was to have your own voice and to sound unique. And now it's the polar opposite, where music has just turned into wallpaper, or at least popular mainstream.
Yes.
Just
Well,
absolute garbage.
I think what you said about, like the 60s had such great PR, didn't they? And everybody loved the 60s. It was like, oh, if only I'd been born in the 60s. And it took decades for the 70s to sort of get a bit of sort of like, oh, no, wait a minute, it's quite good. There's
Yeah,
all this stuff. And actually, even prog rock's quite good and let's worry about it. And I think the 80s has struggled, but I think it's slowly getting a bit more kind of noticed. And I think part of it is also the tribal quality of, because you had sort of the new Paisley, you had people like Prince and that funk scene, then you
yeah,
had indie pop, then you had sort of psychobilly, then you had new romantics and sort of electronic scene, and then I mean
yeah.
even things like hair metal from LA becomes a little bit more. Initially, it's kind of ridiculous with seeing people like David Coverdale and Bon Jovi and those guys, but then after a while, you think actually there are some quite good songs in there. It's just
Oh
like
yeah, like I love Motley Crue, and that's the thing. Like, it was still about songcraft and writing songs, and the incredible um, things that were accomplished in the '60s were still very much in people's minds. Whether it was the Beatles or whatever, like the Stones, the Kinks, Leonard Cohen, on and on and on. So much incredible music that had been made. Like people were still vibing off of that in the '80s and into the '90s. And it's interesting. I'll talk to younger musicians now and younger people, and a lot of them are really into older music, whether it means by this point like Nirvana or the Beatles, or really go back like Everly Brothers, that kind of stuff. But a lot of kids, it's interesting. Like when I was playing a show the other weekend, I was talking to a younger singer songwriter. He said that he'd never listened to the Beatles, and to me that's mind blowing. Like that's just wild that you'd play music and not even check out a band like the Beatles at the same time. And there's something that's kind of cool about it. It was like, wow, like there's like a real, like, here's where things are starting and people are like just doing their own thing. And, it's all about just human expression, really.
yes, I think it's I sort of interviewed a lot of Liverpool punk bands from that sort of late 70s, and obviously the Beatles. I could understand why they didn't want to. I mean, they knew the Beatles probably inside out, but they also wanted to create their own sound because it was such a legacy over the city. But that's a bit of a slightly different thing than it's
But
like
they're
being
still
in.
aware of them. Like Susie and the Banshees, they made a very conscious decision to start a new kind of music, but they were deeply influenced by the 60s and the Beatles. I mean, they even covering Dear Prudence. But I love that. They felt like the White Album version was unfinished, so they wanted to do their version.
Yes. And they do a great version of Wheels on Fire as well, which I think is just awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, your sort of ability to work with so many people is quite boggling, isn't it? You do have an incredible fluidity for being able to sort of collaborate, or at least sort of, just be.
I love collaborating. I mean, I love music, I love people, and I love learning, and I get bored really easily, and I love to do all sorts of different things, and different people bring out different qualities in you. Like, that's one thing I love about being in this band 7D. Like, I've always loved, guitar players like John McGeoch from Magazine and Susie and the Banshees, and I love Johnny Marr and James Honeyman Scott from the Pretenders, and all these different players, Robert Fripp. But this band is really bringing out that side of my playing that I didn't even know I was really capable of, just because I'm responding to the other musicians in the band. I don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again, whether it's my solo records or playing with other people. Like, what's the point if you're not learning something new and growing and doing something different? I don't want to be the same person over and over and over again.
No.
There's so much incredible music out there. Like, I'm just a fan, and I'm really inspired by all the people I've listened to and looked up to, and I'm just trying to be my own version of all my heroes, whether it's one,
because you guested on an album by Donovan, didn't you, in the sort of mid-90s?
Yeah.
Did you get to meet the man?
Not then, but eventually I did. For that record on Sutras, that's a great record. I played bass on the track with Dave Navarro and a couple other people. He sent me a postcard to thank me, which was really lovely. But then many years later, when I was living in Los Angeles, I'd learned to meditate. I've been practicing Transcendental Meditation for a couple decades. I learned from the woman who went to India with the Beatles, and she taught David Lynch how to meditate. Anyway, so we're having tea, hanging out, and she mentioned that she has a house guest staying, and he might be popping in at some point. It's like, oh, cool. And like an hour later, I hear somebody walking up the driveway, playing acoustic guitar and singing a Christmas carol, and in walks Donovan, and they're old friends, so they were just talking a mile a minute about 1,000 different things. And then we sit in a circle and we're trading guitars back and forth, and I'm playing a song, Donovan will make a comment, and my friend who's also there, he'd play a song and Donovan would comment on it. And finally the guitar gets to Donovan, and he's sort of hemming and hawing, thinking about what to do. And I go, well, is there anything new you're working on? And he goes, yeah. So he plays this beautiful song. I remember a lot of it. It was in E minor. It was in 3/4, kind of a sea shanty, and everything. Just this big, beautiful song. And he's done with it. I was like, wow, that was really great. What's that called? He goes, I don't know. I just made it up right now. Like, he made up a song. He wrote a song in front of our eyes with all the lyrics, verse, chorus, intros, everything, and just like this incredible song. I freaked out. You got to record that. It's like, oh, darling, if I remember how it goes, maybe I will.
That is amazing, isn't it? That is just amazing. Did you ever tour, or have you been around the UK much with your sort of in various bands or on holiday?
Yeah, on holiday more than touring. I was dating a girl who lived in London maybe 10 years ago. I've been there a bunch to play with different people. Just visiting a few times. I think I've probably been maybe a half dozen times. I would love to go back. London is so huge. I really don't know it very well at all, but I always love being there when I'm there. Last time it was close to, I guess, about 10 or 11 years ago. I saw the David Bowie exhibit at the V&A Museum.
Oh, wow. Yes, yeah. I went down there and saw that as well. And also they had another V&A exhibition called So You Want a Revolution or something like that, which was, again, this brilliantly put together sort of carefully curated sort of narrative of the 60s, but not just music, but fashion and politics and race and gender. But the V&A one of Bowie was just extraordinary. I just asked because I know in the UK we love our cosmicness, and hippie new age stuff. And I know Donovan used to sort of spend a lot of time in a place in Scotland, Findhorn, and it's always about sort of earth energies and ley lines and stuff like that. And I just wondered if and stone circles, people love stone circles in this country. And I just wondered if you tapped into that with your sort of, on some of your spiritual quests at all.
Oh, not those things specifically, but I'm interested in that stuff. I think it's fascinating. I mean, you get all the crop circles, you know.
We get so many crop circles.
Yeah,
so
I think it's interesting. But I definitely believe, you know, there's certainly more than is on the surface. And, you know, I think we're so also conditioned to think that life is so humdrum and mundane, and we all have to, or most of us have to work so incredibly hard just to survive, that we become blind to how incredibly magical and extraordinary it is to even be alive, to even be a human being, and to have this planet, you know, with all the things that just grow out of the ground naturally, and like all the people are amazing, you know, and people are also obviously really cruel and horrible, and I see things shifting. It's a very tumultuous transitional time in the culture, and I believe in the species, and things are really changing. It's certainly not pleasant the last few years, but I just think it's so amazing to be alive and to all be here together and to be able to share, music and art and ideas. It's really just all it is communication. Even all that stuff gets polluted by the idea of commerce. Not that there's not anything wrong with making money or making things and selling things, but when the values become out of whack, really like the music or any art, it's a sacred thing. It's a language. It's communication. Yes. And but at the same time, like, we're human beings, and we have rent and bills, and so people need to get paid and need to get paid properly. But I think these things that have been so out of balance for so long are coming back into balance, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people. Terence McKenna called it a return to archaic values, which I think is a really interesting way of looking at things. Not to regress, not to go backwards, but to look to the past for inspiration and how to take good ideas and apply them to the present situation. Whether it's from indigenous cultures or just how we were. Look what was going on in the '60s. Like, that'd be amazing if there those kind of attitudes towards relating to each other and being creative. Went on a bit of a tangent there, but
no, it's kind of interesting because I think there was a period just after the '60s, especially in this area in the UK and probably all the UK, where there was a sort of return to, I think you said Arcadia. There was a sort of an idea. There was a sort of a romanticism about the countryside. Especially in England, of sort of like meadows and fields and country lanes, and wanting to get back to nature. And there was a lot of people who moved out of the cities into countryside, into cottages, wanted to become self-sufficient, getting a little bit of land, growing vegetables, living in. And there was a lot of communities that started as well, and people started experimenting with slightly different ways of wanting to live. And definitely gave it a go. It didn't often end terribly well, but I do.
Like straw dogs.
I do. Yeah, Jesus, quite serious. Yeah, I think it was that sort of the reality of winters can suddenly make you feel a little. I think a lot of people went to a lot of fairs and festivals. They had a lot of these kind of no electricity festivals, which weren't like what we think of as festivals now. They're called fairs. So there was much more. There wasn't about stage and bands. It was much more about entertainers and circus folk and theatre people, and a lot of people playing acoustic instruments. And that sort of happened in the early '70s. I should send you a film. I should send you a film about the Barsham Fairs, and then you'll go, bloody. And and then you'll see this kind of a lot of people got into North American rituals. They loved doing sweat lodges, and they loved doing all that kind of how are animal stuff, and even though they were animals that no one had ever seen in this country, there was a sort of searching for something kind of bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a common human thing. It's funny too, you saying that, because over here, a lot of people are obsessed with like Wicker Man and the whole, whether it's European and UK old rituals. I guess it's always the grass is always greener.
Yes,
But I
but
think that's yeah, and these are rituals, like all these things that we would take for granted over the years, like going to concerts and singing each other's songs and writing books and making art and music and communicating to each other. Like these are ancient things, as long as there's been human beings telling stories and inspiring each other and giving warnings, and the elders like passing down information and knowledge, and so it's a lineage.
Yes, and though the narratives, if you poke them, don't always add up. I know with like Glastonbury Festival, though it's in Pilton, I mean that was kind of somebody had got their idea of the ley line where there was this energy, and they found this place, and then they built the pyramid stage, and then there's that whole legends around Glastonbury and this holy thorn and this where Jesus came.
I wasn't aware of that. That's cool.
And all these kind of great folklores. But I think it was because in the post-60s period, people were looking for some ritual, and the church didn't feel quite enough, and it was a little bit distant, really. But then you go beyond religion, and then you get paganism, and then you get sort of stone circles, and people be much more connected to the circle of the earth, and the time, passing of the time and the seasons. And I think that all makes a difference. And then you learn how I don't know if you know how they fix the date of Easter, but it's like they sort of find after the spring equinox, which is equal day and night, there's the full moon, and then it's the following weekend after the full moon. So the full moon could be straight after the equinox, or it could be weeks. Which then,
so even still, we do it that way.
We do it this way now. So that's why people say Easter's early this year or Easter's late. It's because
I didn't know that.
So it's like the it's the equinox, the spring equinox, the full moon, and the weekend after the full moon. So whenever that full moon is, and you think, God, that is so pagan. It's not like it's set like Christmas Day. You think that's Christmas Day. That's
interesting. And everything you're talking about, Brian Eno talks a lot about surrender, and how that's really what we're looking for, whether it's a work of art or a concert or music. We're looking to lose ourselves and to surrender to the work. And I think everybody, whether we realize it or not, like we love that feeling of like being able to just get totally enthralled and lost in a song or an experience, or and that's what people, religion is not, doesn't really resonate with me, but I can understand how somebody might, relate to that and want to be part of that community. But I think whatever community makes sense in whatever way, I just like kind of taking bits and different ideas, here and there from things that are interesting to me and sort of forming my own.
Yes. Well, I think community is important, even though solitude as well is important. It's just getting that balance, but feeling like one is occasionally part of something is quite important, because otherwise one gets a bit feral and a bit odd.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I moved back to LA, really. I love New York. I loved living there, and I'm glad I did it, and I've got zero regrets, but it became obvious to me that my community is in LA, like all my friends are here, and, musically, like these are where my people are, and you got to go where it makes sense for you, wherever that is.
Yes. So do you have a sort of your own studio in your house there? Or have you managed to sort of construct?
I'm talking to you on it. I use my laptop. I just have a laptop with a bunch of software and, a bunch of guitars and a microphone. Everything is just inside the laptop.
No. A lot of people are doing that now. Yes, absolutely. So
to me, the song is king. Like the song is the most important thing. And it doesn't matter how it's recorded. You know, I mean, a recording studio is the same thing as your house. It's just a room with a microphone. You know what I mean? And that's not to put down engineers. Like engineers are artists, you know, and deserve to get paid. And you know, there's nothing like working with a great engineer. But for me, like I just do things as cheaply as I possibly can. Sometimes I'm like the last record I put out last year, I mixed it myself because it just made sense and I liked the way it sounded. And you know, this new record that's coming out, Alan Johannes mixed it because he had skills that I don't have, and I just wanted to collaborate. And you know, like what now is such an incredible time. There's kind of anything under the sun that you could imagine is possible to achieve. And whether it's with gear or collaborating with people, like I see people all the time, like musicians, you know, like Dale Krober from the Melvins, the drummer from the Melvins is, you know, posting like, you know, hit me up if you want me to record drums on your songs. And, you know, things that would have been unthinkable a couple of decades ago. And, you know, people
Yes.
are doing it like the reasons are a little, you know, it can be annoying, but like everyone is, you know, for the most part, just trying to pay their bills. And like you musicians that wouldn't, you know, think of like, hey, hit me up, I'll play in your records, you know, give me $200 or whatever. People do it now.
Yes.
No one can make any money from streaming, and even touring is cost prohibitive a lot. But you know, we're all finding a way to make it work. You know.
Yes. And on your last album, The Rise of the Rebel Angels, who was the artist for the artwork? Because that's quite an amazing cover.
Kenny Young, isn't it beautiful? Yeah, he's an art student at the Art Students League of New York, and we made friends. And you know, I saw it's his title too. Like I saw the painting on his Instagram, and it was titled that, and it's like, oh, that's the album cover and the title, you know.
Yes.
And it's a takeoff or kind of an inverse of Bruegel the Elder, or Bruegel the Elder, Fall of the Rebel Angels, which is very dark, both thematically and in color. Like it's very brown and shadowy, and they're holding instruments of war. And his Rise of the Rebel Angels is the inverse, which is very colorful, and they're holding musical instruments and large wedges of fruit, you know, just flying around, very colorful.
Yes. So what's the title of the new album? Because you've got the single, which is kind of out at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, the new single is called In Deepest Dark.
Yes.
And in a couple weeks, the next single, Kiss the Vulture, with Hunt Sales on drums and Scott Tunis on bass, that's going to come out at the end of the month. But the album is called Supernatural Radio, which is a Tom Petty song, an obscure Tom Petty song from a kind of album that slipped through the cracks a little bit. I didn't intentionally steal it, but it just sort of popped up, and later it was like, oh yeah, that's a Petty tune. So that's it.
There you go. That's amazing. And again, it's going to be on, is it Ghost? Oh God, now I've missed my
No,
name.
Loose Groove. Ghostworks Recordings is the label name I was using to release my own stuff.
Yes.
But, these next couple of records I'm putting out on Loose Groove Recordings, Loose Groove Records.
Right. And this is, yes, Pearl Jam. This is the connection, isn't it?
Yeah, Stone Gossard, it's his label.
This is it.
Put
My
out the
God.
first. Yeah, they put out the first Queens of the Stone Age record in the late '90s, and closed up shop and decided to start back up again about, I think, 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yes, that's amazing.
And I met them through Alan Johannes, who mixed my record. He's friends with Stone. I asked him to pass off my record to him. He did so, and Stone liked it. It was that easy. It was nice.
God, that's fantastic. And and if you could have whispered something to your 16-year-old self starting out, is there anything in particular that you would have gone, yes, that's a good idea, or not?
Just believe in yourself. You know, just trust yourself. You know, stay open to other people and always to, you know, accept a good idea, but ultimately trust yourself and stop drinking.
Stop drinking and take, you know, Transcendental Meditation. It's a good trade-off, isn't it? Do you meditate every day?
Yeah, I try to do it twice a day. David Lynch says he's done it twice a day since 1973, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, I've definitely missed my share of meditations, but I find it really helpful. There's no like belief required, and there's nothing occult or anything about it. It's just, I mean, it's even mainstream science is showing that it reduces stress, and um, they're using it even in the army for, post-traumatic stress disorder. And for me, I just feel like myself when I do it. And when I don't do it, if it's been a few days, like I start to really feel a lot more vulnerable to stresses, and my thinking becomes a lot more chaotic and difficult to wrangle, and I feel a lot more anxious,
Yes, I
and
was going to
prone to
say
depression.
anxiety. How do you deal with anxiety? Is that through just maintaining meditation?
Yeah, I mean, meditating really helps me. Uh, for me, stopping drinking was a big one. Going into therapy, um, and just like mundane stuff, like jogging. Like I don't go a ton, but like I jog, and just take care of my body, like watch what I eat. Like I'm not super health nut, but like I kind of learned what works for me and what doesn't. You know, I want to feel,
Yes,
look good.
we
Just kind
all
of,
love we all love jogging.
yeah. I don't know if all of us do. I don't even know if I love jogging. It's just, but when I'm, when you do it, I get good ideas. Kind of shakes things up. Get me out of the house.
Yes, it just shifts. It shifts something, doesn't it? I don't
Yeah.
know. I do sort of think that's kind of important. I did go to one of those Tony Robbins weekends, and he said
Oh, did you
something that we
walk the
should
fire?
walk the fire. I did walk the
Like,
fire.
yeah,
I don't know.
cool.
That was quite good. But he did say, if you change your expectations for appreciation, your life feels like a miracle. And I always thought that was quite good. And he said the two main things is kindness and creativity. And I thought, those take home bits were probably, like, oh yeah, I always remind
Yeah,
myself that.
I
Well,
can
especially
relate to that.
on days when you feel a bit irritated, you think, well, I should be grateful for all the other things that are working. So life is a miracle, really. So
Yeah, and it can sound corny, but I think it's really true. Like gratitude is really a magical thing. Sometimes you have to force yourself, and when you don't even really believe it or feel like it, to feel thankful for, the difficult periods, the difficult days, or situations that you really don't want to be in. But
yes.
I just, like, I've got a lot of friends who've died, or people that just kind of go by the wayside, and I just feel really lucky to still be alive and sane and healthy, and everybody I care about is in good shape, and I'm be able to make music and making a living, and life is good, man. Like for me, like another big thing is just learning how to be okay with less. Like I don't
Yes.
need that much, and whether it's practical stuff, like maybe I don't need those 6 bookcases, maybe I can get away with 2, and just like, be able to afford a cheaper apartment, you know. But just not, the less feel like I need, it almost feels like the more I have, like the more appreciation I have for the things I do have, whether it's songs or songwriting, or you know, uh, being creative, or just being able to get up and sing a song. Like my voice works, and I can play guitar, and like my fingers are working, and it's
Yes, God, I
cool.
mean, yes, I know. We mustn't take any of that for granted
Yeah.
because one day it might not be quite so fluid or
Or one day it's all gonna be gone.
it's all going to be gone. So, yes, we appreciate every moment, even when you're in the slightly tense moments of life.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
You're
it's
here.
no, it's good to have that awareness, actually. But look, this has been fantastic. Thank you ever so much for your time. This has been brilliant. And
Thank
if
you
you
for having
want,
me
I can
on, David.
always yeah, send you a link, and then you could always use it elsewhere for your
Yeah,
whatever.
please do.
I
I'll
will. But thanks again for your time, and I hope you have a
You
lovely
too.
day. Yes.
Thanks,
Okay.
David.
Take care. See
All
you
right.
later. But I'm hitting. Bye bye. Bye bye. Yes, I know. That's showbiz for you, folks. That's how you finish an interview. Anyway, that's me in conversation with Jonny Polonsky, talking about his life in music. If you want to go to his website, I will put a link in the notes below. But his latest album, Rise of the Rebel Angels, is available on various streaming sites and probably as a CD as well. But anyway, you'll find it on Bandcamp. Yes, this has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 show. It's always nice to hear from you. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. True. Have a great week. Stay safe.